So let's think about the cell and its complexity by first asking and repeating a challenge question that Dawkins will, I think he's even put in his book, The Greatest Show on Earth. He'll observe that we all start as a single cell, but the cell builds itself. Mom and dad aren't setting their watches, marking the calendar. Well, we got to make sure we feed the baby in the womb at this month, at this time. Legs are about to develop. Did you do your part? None of this is happening. It just builds itself in the womb. And so Dawkins would say it's natural processes. Look at the incredible complexity that nature by itself can accomplish. And I think he's premature in his conclusion and misses the forest for the trees. So he has a point. There's a tremendous construction that's happening. It's right to call it a biological construction project too. Sperm meets egg, mom's DNA and egg, dad's DNA and sperm, they fuse. It's one compartment and this starts now the developmental process. And there's a lot to build, from a microscopic single-celled zygote, the technical scientific term for it, to all of these cells in my body is an enormous construction project. And it happens with such regularity. Malformations are so unusual, I mean, we don't even think about it usually, that you really have to wonder. So is it nature that's responsible? What is going on here? Is there no intelligence? Is that what he's saying? Because mom and dad aren't involved? Well, when I think about a building construction project, there's a lot of parallels then to what happens in the womb. And that's where I think the real truth comes out. So you think about a biological construction project. I think currently the tallest building in the world is the Burj Khalifa in the Middle East. Now, sand and oil below the surface don't spontaneously assemble themselves into that sort of structure. What has to happen? And you can think of categories of work that have to occur. We take for granted that you have an energy input. Now, there's energy there. The sun is hitting the sand and creating high temperatures, but that doesn't transform the sand. We have to have useful forms of energy. So we mine the oil. Maybe we'll have solar panels to transform the energy. We have to transform the energy into a form we can use. That's the first step. Secondly, we have to have tools that can harness that energy. I mean, you can dump oil till you're blue in the face in the Middle East, and it will not build itself. It has to be transformed and then connected to power tools or construction equipment to clear the area, to create steel. And that's actually part of the first step too. You have to have transform materials, steel, glass, so forth. You can't just dump the raw materials in the middle of the desert and hope they assemble themselves. So you have transformed energy and materials. You have that connected to tools. You dump those in the middle of the desert, they won't build themselves. You have to have a plan. You don't just randomly start assembling. You have to have a blueprint. Those three components also are not sufficient. If nobody follows the blueprint, it's never going to get built. You have to have a foreman who's then connecting all these pieces together in the appropriate time, appropriate order, appropriate place. Well, you have analogies for all of these in the cell. DNA is the substance of heredity, so we can immediately say, well, there's your blueprint. The DNA itself. Something about that twisted ladder-like structure, the rungs of it, the information, the billions of letters in our cells. Something about that says 2 legs, 2 arms, 10 fingers, 2 eyes, so forth. Well, where's the energy? We know the embryo gets its energy from mom, so somehow it has to be through her diet. It's digested, broken down. Okay, so that's taken care of. Mom supplies it, eventually through the placenta to the embryo. But what uses that energy? And really, it's some of these same components. It's proteins that use it, and they'll build the microscopic molecular components of our cells. Cells divide. You have to make more of the components of these cells and more DNA because you're replicating DNA, and more of the cell wall, and on the list goes. So proteins, and really now we'd say even RNA in ways that are shocking us. There are molecular analogies to tools that use the power that mom supplies through her diet. And now the critical question, where's the foreman who says, here at this place and this time, now put these cells here in this shape to make a finger? Where's that information, and who's making sure it happens? And really it's the interaction among all of these components, DNA, RNA, protein, together it's sort of an information loop in a way that we still really have no idea. We're just at the tip of the iceberg to understand how this works. Our executing the program in DNA to result in this. So at this point, the evolutionists might still say, there's no intelligence. Naturally, it all happens by itself. We can substitute for the foreman. And that's where it misses it. Let's go back then to our building analogy. What would it take to have the physical version of this biological construction project we've just described? It's analogous to having a computer programmer program a computer chip that you can fly over the desert, drop it in the sand, and as soon as it hits the sand, it begins to assemble a power plant and a manufacturing plant and build tools and spit out a blueprint and then start assembling itself. It's a science fiction. It doesn't happen. That's what's going on in the cell. And that's where Dawkins stops one step short. To do the physical version of what's going on in the cell, you need a level of intelligence that humanity on a global scale has yet to achieve. There's no one who can program a computer chip that hits the sand and does all that. And it gets worse for the evolutionists because on the biological side, there are mechanisms in the cell to spot errors, because they happen, and to correct them. DNA gets replicated, errors happen, and corrects them. Some still escape through, but error correction happens. So not only would the computer programmer have to program this chip to, from nothing basically, invent the power plant and manufacturing plant and build tools and a blueprint and so forth, it would have to be able to spot errors during this process and correct them. And here's the real kicker in this whole process. The body builds itself, and it builds a body that has the capacity for reproduction to start it all over. So this engineer, this programmer, would have to have a computer chip that hits the sand, builds all these things naturally, assembles them together, power plant tools, manufacturing plant, blueprint, coordination system, error correction, spotting. And then when the Burj Khalifa is built, to spit out another computer chip and repeat the process all over again. There is no collective human intelligence that's done anything close to what the cell does. So Dawkins sees natural and thinks, oh, that means absence of intelligence, when in fact this natural process exceeds our best analogies. I mean, I'm making things up that don't even exist to try to describe what's actually going on in the cell in 7 billion people around the planet on a regular basis. There just is no analogy for it. It points to a superintelligence that goes beyond not just one individual, but one global humanity that still together has not been able to achieve what happens in 9 months in the womb.